A mysterious knock. It was a quiet, rainy night in the countryside. Alex sat in his living room, sipping a cup of hot tea and listening to the soft patter of raindrops on the windows. The dim light of a single lamp filled the room, and the faint sound of thunder rumbled in the distance. It was the kind of night that felt calm and uneventful, perfect for relaxing after a long day. But then, out of nowhere, came a loud, urgent knock at the door. Alex froze, his cup of tea halfway to his lips. He wasn't expecting anyone. His house was far from town, and visitors were rare, especially at this hour. For a moment, he thought he might have imagined it. But the knock came again, louder and more desperate this time. Who could that be? He muttered to himself, placing the cup on the table and standing up. His mind raced with possibilities. Could it be a lost traveler, or maybe someone in trouble? The rain made it hard to hear anything else outside, and the pounding of his heart only added to his unease. Slowly, Alex walked to the door, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the house. As he reached the door, he hesitated. What if it was something dangerous? His hand hovered over the doorknob. Another knock, this one softer but no less insistent, broke his hesitation. "Please, help me," a voice whispered from the other side. The voice was feminine, trembling with fear and desperation. Alex's caution turned into concern. He unlocked the door and opened it slightly, peeking out to see who was there. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Standing on the porch was a woman, but not an ordinary one. Her skin was a pale, silvery blue that seemed to shimmer faintly even in the dim light. Her eyes were large and bright, glowing softly like a pair of small moons. She was drenched from head to toe, her long, dark hair sticking to her face as rain poured down around her. "Please," she said again, her voice shaking. "Let me in. They're coming." Alex blinked, trying to process what he was seeing. Was this some kind of trick? A prank? He glanced behind her, half expecting to see a group of people with cameras laughing at him. But the road was empty, and the storm raged on, offering no signs of anything unusual, except her. Who are you?" he stammered, keeping the door partly closed. "There's no time to explain," she replied, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Please, I'll explain everything. But I can't stay out here. They'll find me." The fear in her voice was real, and despite his confusion, Alex felt a pang of sympathy. Whoever, or whatever, she was terrified. Against his better judgment, he opened the door wider and stepped aside. "Come in," he said cautiously. The woman didn't hesitate. She slipped inside, dripping water onto the floor as she moved. Alex shut the door quickly and locked it, his mind racing with questions. She stood in the middle of his living room, shivering and looking around as if expecting something, or someone, to burst in at any moment. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with relief. "You saved my life." Alex wasn't sure how to respond. He grabbed a towel from a nearby chair and handed it to her. "Here," he said, "you're soaked." She took the towel and wrapped it around herself, her glowing eyes meeting his for a brief moment. "I'm sorry for barging in like this," she said, "but I didn't have anywhere else to go." Alex crossed his arms, trying to appear calm even though his heart was pounding. "Who are you? And what do you mean, they're coming?" The woman hesitated, biting her lip as if deciding how much to tell him. "My name is Lyra," she said finally. "I'm not from around here." "No kidding," Alex muttered under his breath. "You don't exactly look local." Lyra didn't smile. Her expression remained serious as she took a step closer to him. "You're in danger now too," she said, "because you helped me." Alex felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of danger? Before Lyra could answer, a faint noise outside made them both freeze. It was hard to hear over the rain, but it sounded like voices, low and distant, but getting closer. "They found me," Lyra whispered, her eyes widening. "We have to hide." Alex's instinct was to ask more questions, but the urgency in her voice left no room for hesitation. "Follow me," he said, leading her toward the back of the house. As they moved, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. The unspoken danger. Alex led Lyra to the back of the house, his mind racing with questions he didn't dare ask just yet. The faint sound of voices outside had vanished, replaced only by the relentless patter of rain against the windows. Still, the way Lyra moved, cautiously, her head turning sharply at every creak of the old wooden floor, told him she believed the danger was far from over. In the small kitchen, Alex pulled out a chair for Lyra. She hesitated before sitting down, her glowing eyes scanning the room as if assessing its safety. Alex grabbed a blanket from the nearby sofa and draped it over her shoulders. She pulled it tightly around herself, her silvery blue skin still glistening from the rain. "You're safe now," Alex said, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "At least I think you are. But you need to tell me what's going on." Lyra looked at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and hesitation. "Safe," she repeated softly, almost as if testing the word. "No one is ever truly safe." Alex frowned. "Look, I'm not asking for your life story, just an explanation. Who's after you? And why did you come to me of all people?" Lyra lowered her gaze, her hands gripping the edges of the blanket. "I didn't choose you specifically," she admitted. "I was running, and your house was the closest shelter. But now that I'm here," she paused, her glowing eyes meeting his. "I need your help." Alex crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. "Help with what? Running from whoever's chasing you? Hiding you? I don't even know what's going on." Lyra's voice trembled as she spoke. "They're not just chasing me. They're hunting me. And if they find me, if they find us, they won't leave witnesses." The weight of her words settled over Alex like a heavy fog. He tried to stay calm, but the rising fear in his chest was impossible to ignore. "Who are they?" he asked, his tone firmer now. "What do they want from you?" "They're called the Vraks," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're a faction from my world, ruthless and unrelenting. I was supposed to be one of them, but I refused." Alex narrowed his eyes. "Refused what?" Lyra hesitated again, as if struggling to decide how much to reveal. "I was sent on a mission," she said finally. "A mission that would have destroyed countless lives. I couldn't go through with it. I escaped with something they want, something they'll do anything to get back." "What is it?" Alex pressed. Lyra glanced toward the window, her expression tense. "It's better if you don't know," she said. "The less you know, the safer you'll be." Alex let out a frustrated sigh. "You keep saying that, but I'm already involved. You showed up on my doorstep, remember? Whatever trouble you're in, I'm in it now too." Before Lyra could respond, a sharp noise outside made them both freeze. It was faint but distinct, a metallic clink, like something tapping against the side of the house. Alex's eyes darted to the window, but the rain made it impossible to see anything clearly. "They're here," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. She stood up quickly, her movements sharp and controlled despite her fear. "We have to move." "Move where?" Alex asked, his voice rising. "This is my house. There's nowhere to go." Lyra turned to him, her glowing eyes intense. "Then we'll have to fight." Alex stared at her, stunned. "Fight? With what? I'm not exactly armed for this kind of situation." Lyra reached into the folds of her soaked cloak and pulled out a small metallic device. It was no bigger than a smartphone, but it pulsed with a strange blue light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "This will help," she said, holding it out to him. Alex hesitated before taking it. The device felt warm in his hand, almost alive. "What is this?" he asked. "It's a defense tool," Lyra explained. "It can create a barrier or release an energy pulse strong enough to disable them, temporarily. But it's not foolproof." Great, Alex muttered. Just what I needed. A crash course in alien tech. Another sound outside. Closer this time. Cut their conversation short. Lyra grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Listen to me, she said urgently. If they break in, you have to use that device. Aim it at them and press the center button. Don't hesitate, or we won't survive. Alex nodded, his mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. A day ago, his biggest concern had been whether his tea had enough sugar. Now he was standing in his kitchen, preparing to face alien hunters with a mysterious, glowing device in his hand. The next sound wasn't faint. It was loud and unmistakable. The front door rattled violently, as if something, or someone, was trying to force it open. Lyra's eyes locked onto his. They're here. The first promise. The rattling at the front door grew louder, each attempt more forceful than the last. Alex gripped the strange alien device in his hand, his palms damp with sweat. Lyra stood beside him, her glowing eyes fixed on the door, her body tense like a coiled spring. She wasn't just scared, she was ready to act. Get behind me, Alex whispered. Lyra shook her head. You don't understand. If they get in, they won't stop until we're off. Stop talking in riddles. Alex interrupted, his voice sharper than he intended. If you want me to trust you, then tell me what's really going on. Lyra's glowing eyes softened for a moment, a flicker of regret crossing her face. You're right, she said quietly. You deserve the truth, but we don't have much time. The sound of something heavy slamming against the door made Alex flinch. The lock was holding, but it wouldn't for long. Lyra took a deep breath and turned to him, her voice calm despite the chaos outside. I was sent to Earth as part of a mission, she began, speaking quickly. My people needed me to retrieve something, an ancient energy source buried deep within this planet. It's powerful, dangerous, and in the wrong hands, it could destroy worlds. Alex stared at her, struggling to process the gravity of her words. So you stole it? He asked. Lyra nodded. I couldn't let them use it. They would have weaponized it, used it to conquer other planets. I couldn't be a part of that. So I ran. I've been running ever since. And these Vrax people, Alex said, gesturing toward the door, they want it back. They want me back, Lyra corrected. The energy source is bonded to me now. If they capture me, they'll extract it, by any means necessary. Alex's grip on the alien device tightened. And what happens if they extract it? Lyra's voice dropped to a whisper. It will tear me apart. And then they'll use it to destroy everything in their path, including this planet. The weight of her confession hit Alex like a tidal wave. He wanted to believe it was all some elaborate nightmare, but the fear in Lyra's eyes and the pounding at his door told him otherwise. Why should I trust you? He asked, his voice low. You show up here out of nowhere, bring danger to my doorstep, and now you're asking me to risk my life for you. Lyra stepped closer, her expression earnest. Because I'm not asking you to risk your life for me, she said. I'm asking you to risk it for everyone. For your world, your people. I could have gone anywhere, but I came here. To you, because I believe you're the one who can help me. Alex felt a strange mix of fear, anger, and something else. Something he couldn't quite name. Was it hope? Or maybe a sense of responsibility he hadn't felt in years? Either way, he couldn't ignore the fire in Lyra's voice, or the way her glowing eyes seemed to see straight through him. The door groaned under the weight of another blow, the wood splintering slightly. Lyra reached out and touched Alex's arm, her hand warm despite her earlier trembling. I promise you, she said, her voice steady, if we survive this, I'll do everything I can to make it right. But right now, I need you to trust me. Please. Alex hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. He thought about the life he'd been living. Quiet, uneventful, safe. And then he thought about the lives Lyra said were at stake. Could he really turn her away? Could he live with himself if he did? Before he could answer, the door burst open with a deafening crack. 3 figures stepped inside, their silhouettes sharp and menacing against the stormy night. They were tall, humanoid, but their features were anything but human. Skin like black metal, glowing red eyes, and hands that ended in razor-sharp claws. The Vracs. Lyra stepped in front of Alex, her posture defiant despite the overwhelming odds. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice echoing through the room. "You don't have to do this." One of the Vracs laughed, a cold, mechanical sound. "You can't run forever, Lyra," it said, its voice distorted and inhuman. "Come quietly, and we might spare your pet." Alex felt a surge of anger at being called a pet, but before he could say anything, Lyra raised her hands. The small metallic device in her palm began to hum, emitting a bright blue light. "Not today," she said, her voice filled with determination. The Vracs lunged forward, and everything erupted into chaos. The hunt. The air inside the house crackled with tension as the Vracs surged forward, their movements unnervingly precise and mechanical. Lyra's device flared to life, emitting a pulse of blue energy that rippled through the room like a shockwave. The first Vrax was thrown back, crashing into the doorway, its body sparking as it struggled to regain its footing. Alex stumbled backward, gripping his own alien device tightly. "What the hell is happening?" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the strange, high-pitched hum filling the room. "Focus," Lyra snapped, darting toward him. "Use the device. Aim and press the center button. It will disable them for a few seconds." One of the Vracs stepped forward, unfazed by the energy pulse. Its glowing red eyes locked onto Lyra, and with an unnatural speed, it raised a clawed hand. Before it could strike, Alex instinctively lifted the device and pressed the button. A beam of light shot out, hitting the Vrac square in the chest. The creature froze, its body rigid as if paralyzed. "It worked," Alex whispered, his voice trembling. "Good," Lyra said, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the back of the house. "But it won't hold them for long. We need to move. Now." As they ran, the sound of the Vracs recovering echoed behind them. The metallic scrape of claws on wood sent chills down Alex's spine. Lyra led him to a small pantry at the back of the kitchen. She knelt and pressed her hand against the floor, revealing a hidden hatch he'd never noticed before. "How did you know that was there?" Alex asked, breathless. Lyra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "I scanned your house when I came in. I had to make sure there was an escape route." "You scanned my—" Alex started to protest, but the sound of the Vracs approaching cut him off. He shook his head and climbed down into the dark space below, Lyra following close behind. She pulled the hatch shut just as the kitchen door burst open. In the darkness of the crawl space, Alex could hear the heavy footsteps of the Vracs above them. The creatures moved methodically, searching the house room by room. He held his breath, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure the Vracs could hear it. "They'll find us," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible. "No," Lyra said firmly. "This space is shielded. They won't detect us unless we make noise." "How do you know so much about my house?" Alex asked, his frustration bubbling over. "You're a complete stranger, and you've somehow got a map of my home and alien tech that—" "I didn't plan this," Lyra interrupted, her voice soft but resolute. "I didn't choose your house because I knew you. I chose it because I sensed something in you, something different. You were my best chance." "Best chance for what?" Alex asked, his tone harsh. "To survive," Lyra said simply. "And to stop them." Alex stared at her, his fear mixing with confusion and anger. He wanted answers, but there was no time to demand them. Above them, the Vracs continued their search, their distorted voices speaking in a language Alex couldn't understand. One of the voices grew louder, closer. Alex froze, his grip tightening on the alien device. Lyra placed a hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly steady. "Stay calm," she whispered. "They won't find us if we stay quiet." The footsteps passed over them, moving toward another part of the house. Alex let out a shaky breath, but the tension in his chest didn't ease. "This isn't going to work forever," he said. "What happens when they figure out we're gone?" Lyra's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. "We won't be here when they do." Before Alex could ask what she meant, Lyra pressed a small button on her wristband. A holographic map of the area appeared in midair, illuminating the crawl space with a soft blue glow. She pointed to a blinking dot nearby. "There's a transport pod hidden about a mile from here. If we can reach it, we can escape." "And then what?" Alex asked. "They'll just keep coming, won't they?" "Yes," Lyra admitted. "But if we reach the pod, we can activate a cloaking field. It will buy us time." "Time for what?" "To figure out how to stop them. For good," she said, her voice unwavering. Alex wanted to argue, to demand a better plan, but the look in Lyra's eyes silenced him. She wasn't just running for her life. She was fighting for something bigger, something he couldn't fully grasp yet. And whether he liked it or not, he was part of it now. "Fine," he said. "Let's do this." Lyra nodded and pressed another button on her wristband. The floor beneath them shifted, revealing a narrow tunnel leading away from the house. "Follow me," she said. As they crawled through the tunnel, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet, ordinary life was gone forever, and as the sound of the vraks grew fainter behind them, he realized that maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. Revelations. The narrow tunnel was dark and cold, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. Alex followed Lyra closely, his breathing heavy and uneven. The weight of everything she had told him so far sat like a stone in his chest. Aliens, a deadly energy source, ruthless hunters. It was too much to process. Yet the sound of the vraks searching his house above had left him no choice but to keep moving. "How much farther?" Alex asked, his voice echoing softly in the confined space. "Not far," Lyra replied without turning around. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge of urgency that kept Alex on edge. "The tunnel leads to a clearing in the woods. From there, we'll make our way to the transport pod." Alex glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the glowing red eyes of the vraks behind them. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, the faint light from Lyra's wristband, the only thing guiding their way. He wanted to ask more questions, to demand answers, but the oppressive silence of the tunnel made him hesitant to speak. Finally, the tunnel opened up into a small underground chamber. Lyra stopped and turned to face Alex, her glowing eyes studying him intently. "We need to talk before we go any farther," she said. Alex frowned. "Now, shouldn't we be focusing on getting to this pod of yours?" "We should," Lyra admitted. "But there's something you need to understand first. You've risked your life to help me, and you deserve to know the truth." Alex crossed his arms, leaning against the dirt wall. "I thought you already told me the truth." "Not all of it," Lyra said softly. She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "The energy source I took, it's not just dangerous. It's alive." Alex blinked, his mind struggling to grasp what she was saying. "Alive? What do you mean?" "It's a sentient entity," Lyra explained. "An ancient being of pure energy, capable of immense destruction or creation. My people discovered it centuries ago, buried deep beneath the surface of a dying planet. They contained it, studied it, and eventually sought to use it as a weapon. And you stole it," Alex said, piecing things together. "Why?" "Because it doesn't want to be a weapon," Lyra said, her voice filled with emotion. "It wants to live. It communicated with me, showed me visions of what my people were planning to do. Entire planets destroyed, civilizations wiped out, all in the name of conquest. I couldn't let that happen." Alex stared at her, his mind racing. "So this entity, It bonded with you. Lyra nodded. It's part of me now. That's why the Vracs want me so badly. If they capture me, they'll extract the entity and use it to fuel their war machine. But it won't survive the process, and neither will I. The weight of her words settled heavily on Alex's shoulders. He had been dragged into a conflict far beyond anything he had ever imagined, but hearing Lyra's story made it impossible to walk away. She wasn't just fighting for her life, she was fighting for the lives of countless others, including his own. "So what's the plan?" he asked, his tone serious. "How do we stop them?" Lyra's expression darkened. "We can't fight them head-on. They're too powerful. But the entity, it has the ability to disrupt their systems, even destroy their ships. If we can reach the transport pod, we can activate a signal that will draw their fleet away from Earth." Alex frowned. "Won't that just put other planets in danger?" "Not if we lead them into the void," Lyra said. "A region of space where their technology won't work. It's a one-way trip. They'll be stranded there forever." "And you're sure this will work?" Alex asked. Lyra hesitated, her glowing eyes meeting his. "No," she admitted, "but it's the best chance we have." Alex took a deep breath, his mind racing with doubts and fears. But as he looked at Lyra, he saw the determination in her eyes, the weight of the responsibility she carried. She had risked everything to do what was right, and now she was asking him to do the same. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's do it." Lyra's expression softened, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I promise, I'll do everything I can to keep you safe." Alex nodded, gripping the alien device tightly in his hand. "Let's just hope this pod of yours is as good as you say it is." Lyra gave him a faint smile. "It's not the pod you need to trust," she said. "It's me." With that, she turned and began climbing up a narrow ladder that led to the surface. Alex followed, his heart pounding as the cool night air greeted him. The woods were dark and silent, the storm from earlier having faded into a light drizzle. But even in the stillness, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Stay close," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're not out of danger yet." The confrontation. The woods were eerily quiet, the sound of Alex's footsteps muffled by the damp ground. Lyra moved ahead of him, her every step deliberate and silent. The faint glow from her wristband lit their path, casting shadows that danced like ghosts among the trees. Despite the stillness, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. "How much farther?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Just over that ridge," Lyra replied, pointing to a small hill in the distance. "The pod is hidden in a grove. Once we activate it, the cloaking field will keep us safe." Alex glanced over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the darkness. He thought he saw movement, a flicker of red light among the trees, but it disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "They're here, aren't they?" he asked. Lyra nodded grimly. "The Vracs never stop hunting. They've likely been tracking us since we left the house." "Great," Alex muttered. "So what's the plan if they catch up to us?" "We don't let them," Lyra said firmly. "If they corner us, use the device. Aim for their core. It's their only weak spot." "Their core?" Alex asked, his brow furrowing. "You mean their chest?" "Yes," Lyra said. "It's where their power source is located. A direct hit will disable them permanently." Before Alex could respond, a sudden rustling in the bushes made them both freeze. Lyra raised her hand, signaling for Alex to stay quiet. The glow from her wristband dimmed as she pressed a button, plunging them into near-total darkness. The rustling grew louder, closer. Alex tightened his grip on the alien device, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the faint, mechanical hum of the Vracs as they moved through the forest, their distorted voices echoing softly in the distance. Lyra crouched low, her glowing eyes scanning the shadows. "They're spreading out," she whispered, "looking for us. What do we do?" Alex asked, his voice barely audible. "We wait," Lyra replied. "Let them pass. If we move now, they'll hear us." Alex nodded, his breath shallow as he tried to remain still. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the tension in the air growing thicker with each passing second. Finally, the sound of the Vraks began to fade, their voices moving away from the ridge. Lyra stood slowly, motioning for Alex to follow. "We need to move. Now." They climbed the ridge as quickly and quietly as they could, the faint glow of dawn beginning to creep through the trees. As they reached the top, Lyra stopped and pointed to a small clearing below. In the center of the grove was a sleek, metallic pod, its surface reflecting the faint light of the early morning. "That's it," Lyra said, a hint of relief in her voice. "Once we're inside, we'll be safe." But as they descended into the grove, the sound of a branch snapping behind them made Alex's blood run cold. He spun around just in time to see a Vrax emerge from the shadows, its glowing red eyes locking onto him. "They'd found us," Alex shouted. Lyra didn't hesitate. She raised her own device and fired a pulse of blue energy, hitting the Vrax square in the chest. The creature staggered but didn't fall. It let out a distorted roar, its claws slicing through the air as it charged toward them. "Go to the pod," Lyra yelled, stepping in front of Alex. "I'll hold them off." "No way," Alex protested, raising his device. "I'm not leaving you." The Vrax lunged, and Alex fired, the beam from his device striking the creature's core. It froze for a moment before collapsing to the ground, its metallic body sparking as it went still. Lyra glanced at him, a flicker of approval in her eyes. "Nice shot," she said. "But there are more coming. We need to move." As if on cue, two more Vrax emerged from the trees, their red eyes glowing ominously. Lyra grabbed Alex's arm and pulled him toward the pod. "Inside. Now." They sprinted across the clearing, the sound of the Vrax closing in behind them. Lyra reached the pod first, pressing her hand against its smooth surface. A panel slid open, revealing a narrow entrance. She shoved Alex inside before climbing in after him. The door sealed shut just as the Vrax reached the pod, their claws scraping against the exterior. Inside, the pod's interior was bathed in a soft blue light, the walls covered in strange, glowing symbols. Lyra moved quickly, pressing buttons on a control panel. "The cloaking field will activate in 30 seconds, she said. "We just need to hold them off until then." The pod shook as the Vrax pounded on the outside, their distorted voices growing louder. Alex braced himself against the wall, his heart racing. "Are you sure this thing can hold them off?" he asked. Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to him, her expression calm but determined. "I made you a promise," she said, "and I intend to keep it." As the pod's systems came to life, a low hum filled the air. Outside, the pounding stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Lyra glanced at the control panel and smiled faintly. "The field is active," she said. "We're safe, for now." Alex let out a shaky breath, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "So what now?" he asked. "Now," Lyra said, her voice steady, "we prepare for the final step. A new alliance." The soft hum of the pod's cloaking field enveloped Alex and Lyra in an uneasy silence. The pounding of the Vrax on the pod's exterior had ceased, but their presence lingered in Alex's mind like a shadow he couldn't shake. He slumped into one of the pod's curved seats, the alien device still clutched tightly in his hands. Lyra moved to the pod's control panel, her fingers gliding over glowing symbols that seemed to respond to her touch. A holographic map of the surrounding area appeared in midair, displaying their location and the faint red blips of the Vrax still circling outside. She stared at it intently, her glowing eyes filled with determination. "They'll realize soon that the pod has disappeared from their scanners," Lyra said, breaking the silence. "But it won't take them long to guess where we're heading." "And where are we heading?" Alex asked, his voice strained with exhaustion. Lyra turned to him, her expression calm but resolute. To the void. The void. Alex repeated, sitting up straighter. You mean that place you mentioned earlier? The one where their tech won't work? Lyra nodded. It's a region of space where electromagnetic fields and energy signatures are disrupted. It's the only place we can lure them where they'll have no chance of escape. Alex frowned. And what happens to us when we get there? Do we just hope for the best? Lyra hesitated, her gaze dropping for a moment before she looked back at him. No, she admitted. Once we reach the void, I'll activate the energy source within me. It will release a pulse strong enough to destroy their ships and disable them permanently. Alex's breath caught in his throat. Wait, if you're activating this thing, won't it kill you too? It might, Lyra said softly. But it's the only way. No, Alex said firmly, standing up. There has to be another option. You said this thing is alive, right? It doesn't want to be a weapon. So why can't we find a way to use it without sacrificing you? Lyra's expression softened, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. You don't understand, she said. The entity trusts me because I made a promise to protect it, no matter the cost. If that means giving up my life, then so be it. Alex shook his head, his frustration boiling over. That's not protection. That's suicide. There has to be another way. Before Lyra could respond, the pod systems beeped, signaling an incoming transmission. Lyra's eyes narrowed as she pressed a button on the control panel. A distorted, mechanical voice filled the cabin, chilling Alex to the core. Lyra, the voice said, cold and unrelenting. You cannot escape. Surrender now, and we may spare the human. Lyra didn't flinch. You and I both know that's a lie, she replied, her tone icy. You don't spare anyone. The voice laughed, a hollow metallic sound. You're only delaying the inevitable. Your sacrifice will mean nothing. Lyra ended the transmission without another word. She turned to Alex, her expression steely. We have to act now. The Vraks are closing in. Act how? Alex asked. You're not seriously going through with your plan, are you? Lyra hesitated, then sighed. The entity, it showed me something, she said quietly. A vision of another path. But it's risky. Alex leaned forward, his heart pounding. What kind of path? Lyra pressed her hand to her chest, where the faint glow of the entity's energy source pulsed beneath her skin. If I can fully synchronize with it, I might be able to channel its power without destroying myself. But it's dangerous. If I fail, the energy could overload and destroy us all. Alex finished for her. Lyra nodded. It's a gamble. But if it works, we can neutralize the Vraks without sacrificing anyone. Alex met her gaze, his determination matching hers. Then we take the gamble. Lyra smiled faintly. You're braver than I gave you credit for, Alex. As the pod approached the void, Lyra began the synchronization process. The cabin filled with a radiant blue light as the entity's energy enveloped her, its glow growing brighter with each passing second. Alex watched in awe and terror, his hand hovering over the control panel in case something went wrong. Outside, the Vrak ships closed in, their red lights piercing the darkness of space. The lead ship fired a warning shot, the blast shaking the pod violently. Lyra's body tensed as the synchronization reached its peak, the light around her pulsing like a heartbeat. Almost there, she whispered, her voice strained. The Vrak ships fired again. But this time, the energy surrounding Lyra expanded outward, creating a protective shield around the pod. The incoming blasts disintegrated on impact, leaving the Vraks momentarily stunned. It's working, Alex said, his voice filled with hope. But then, the light around Lyra began to flicker. Her body shook, and a pained expression crossed her face. I can't. Hold it, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, you can. Alex shouted. "You're not alone in this." He reached out, placing his hand over hers. The entity's energy surged through him, the sensation both overwhelming and exhilarating. Together, they focused, channeling the energy into a controlled pulse that rippled outward. The pulse hit the Vrax ships, disabling them instantly. The red lights of their eyes and engines dimmed, leaving the ships floating lifelessly in the void. The silence that followed was deafening. Lyra collapsed into the seat, her breathing ragged but steady. The glow of the entity faded, leaving her visibly exhausted but alive. "You did it," Alex said, relief washing over him. "No," Lyra said, a faint smile on her lips. "We did it." As the pod drifted through the void, Alex realized that his life had changed forever. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was part of something bigger. And for the first time in years, he felt truly alive.